Shalom Haverim, and hello friends. It's good to be with you here on this Sunday morning, or whenever it is you are watching this video. I was thinking this week about some of the jobs that I've had over the years, and one of the most challenging jobs I've ever had was working at a recycling center. My job at the recycling center was to crush the cans that soft drinks come in. So day after day, hour after hour, I spent my time crushing these cans. I just couldn't do it anymore. I had to leave that job because crushing those soft drink cans was so depressing. It was so depressing. Okay, so I never actually had a job at a recycling center, but I thought that was kind of funny. Now, we just got back, my family and I, from a vacation. We spent some time in West Virginia camping. Then we went on to visit my family in rural Ohio for a few days. And this was a good chance to see people, to get away from home for a bit and to still be somewhat socially distant because those are very sparsely populated areas. So it was good to see people, good to see family and friends, but also just realizing how much work goes into my family's livelihood. Now, I've shared with my church many times, so those of you that don't know me may not be aware of this, but I grew up on a dairy farm, and the farm is still active. My father and younger brother are working that farm today. To this day, they still work. And I probably made a bit of a mistake by going at a really busy time, but there's really not a time that they're not busy. We visited right when they're doing their second cutting of alfalfa. So mowing the hay, raking the hay, they were chopping and bagging the hay. And a lot of other farmers were combining their wheat and baling the straw. Even we drove by some Amish farms. We saw some wheat shocks. I mean, that's a beautiful thing. The Amish folks out there cutting the wheat, and they shock it together in those big round shocks. I don't know how else to describe it, with all those sheaves together. And the more I see it and the more I'm away from it, I just realize that is so much work. And on top of that, these farmers have their animals to care for. Many have cows to milk. And you're still trying to find time for your family. And these visitors come from the city and they expect some time as well. It's so much work. And it made me realize that this is a good way to follow up last week's message. Last week I talked about rest and how important rest is. God made us for a reason, and we all need to take some time back and rest. But we need to balance work and rest. And when you think about work in the Bible, there's a number of passages that probably come to mind, at least they come to my mind. The first is this word that comes up over and over again in the Proverbs. The Proverbs refer to a lazy person as a sluggard, which is a funny word. I don't know why I giggle, but sluggard, like where else do you use that word? Sluggard, S-L-U-G-G-A-R-D. The sluggard is one who sits by and takes naps and folds his hands, and they don't get very far in life. And of course, the go-to verse that many people think of in the New Testament is 2 Thessalonians 3:10, where we read that if a person doesn't work, that person can't eat. So we have these verses over and over again talking about the virtue of hard work and criticizing laziness. It's different from rest. It's rest to the extreme, laziness. But I don't want to focus on those verses today. What I want to talk about is work as vocation. Now, we use the word vocation sometimes in our daily conversations, but I think we misuse it. When I hear people talk about vocation, they often are referring to like blue-collar work, certain kind of jobs. Maybe you go to a certain kind of school for vocational training. But vocation doesn't necessarily mean a blue-collar job, the kind of job where, I differentiate. There's the kind of jobs that you take a shower before you go to work, and there's the kind of jobs that you take a shower after you go to work. A vocation isn't just a blue-collar job. The word vocation, the definition, is a strong feeling of suitability for a particular career or occupation. And if you look at the word vocation, you'll find that it has the same root as the word vocal. So a vocation, a strong feeling of suitability, this is a calling. In the church, we would say this is God's calling on your life. God has uniquely situated you. God has uniquely gifted you for a certain purpose. It may be white collar, it may be blue collar. You may take a shower before work, you may take a shower after work. You may have to bathe on both sides of work. I don't know. But the point is, God has situated you for a particular job. That is your calling. That is your vocation. Whether it's in politics or parenting, God has situated you and gifted you in a unique way. God maybe has gifted you with a full head of hair and a big smile, and you've been uniquely situated for a job in politics. Or maybe God has gifted you with patience and energy, and you've been gifted for the job, the vocation of parenting. So politics or parenting, business or driving buses, God has called you to something, given you a unique calling and unique gifts. Sometimes those vocations are high paying, sometimes they pay in hugs and kisses. But God has gifted you for something. Now, in 1904, the sociologist Max Weber, a German man, a German sociologist, he wrote the book Protestant Work Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. And some say that Weber coined the phrase Protestant work ethic. I'm not sure if that's true or not. But this book, you've probably heard the phrase Protestant work ethic before, right? This book, Weber goes into his theory on how the Protestant work ethic, this concept of how we are called to work, fed into the modern form of capitalism. But I'm not sure that Weber quite gets it right. He's German, Weber. Weber quite gets it right. Weber talks about how Protestants push to work really hard, and they try to succeed in their business because success in your job, success in this world is a symbol or a sign of God's gifting or satisfaction of you. I'll try to say that in a better way. He's trying to say that it's God's favor. If you have success here, Protestants believe that it is God's favor. It is a sign or a symbol of your salvation. So if you have success, that means you are in with God. So Protestants work extra hard so that they can at least get the confidence in knowing that they are in God's favor. Now, there may be some truth to that. I don't mean to totally try to discredit Weber in a short YouTube video. But that's not what the original Protestants had in mind when they talked about vocation. And when we think about Protestants, the first person we should think of is Martin Luther. And Martin Luther wrote a lot about vocation. And it wasn't about what we would call the Protestant work ethic, but about the Protestant calling to a job. See, what Luther was against was this idea that there are some jobs that are more spiritual, some jobs that mean that you are closer to God. Luther believed that everybody was called and uniquely gifted for something, and that meant that each person had equal access to the spiritual realm. So Luther was against what we would call the divide between the sacred and the secular work. For some reason, those of us who are in pastoral kind of roles have historically thought that we are maybe superior spiritually to other people. And Luther comes in and says that's just not the case. Being a priest or a bishop, Luther says, does not make you any more spiritual than the average bricklayer or stable worker. And Luther goes on to suggest that a priest or a bishop, to anybody that would say that a priest or a bishop was more spiritual just because of their calling, he says, well, that is the guiles of the devil. Lutheran theologian Gene Veith, I think is how he says the name, Gene Veith says this in his book, God at Work. He says of Luther, he says, all vocations are equal before God. Pastors, monks, nuns, and popes are no holier than farmers, shopkeepers, dairymaids, or latrine diggers. In the spiritual kingdom, in divine egalitarianism, which would also come to have cultural implications, peasants are equal to kings. All are sinful beings who have been loved and redeemed by Christ. Veith would then go on to say about vocation, he says, the purpose of vocation is to love and serve your neighbor. So use your job, use your calling, use your vocation, the unique gifts that God has given to you to love and serve your neighbor. No job is more spiritual than any other. Did Jesus come as a priest or a pastor or a bishop? No. Jesus came as a carpenter. And think about Paul. What was Paul's job? How did he earn a living? Paul was a tent maker. A number of the disciples, they were fishermen. None of these jobs are any more spiritual than another. It's what you do with what you've been given that matters. So your vocation, what are you called to do? What are you uniquely gifted to do? And think about it like this. You spend 1/3 of your day at your job, maybe even more. And you probably spend more time on the way to and from work, or even at home, focusing on your job. What could I have done different? What should I have done? What am I going to do tomorrow? We spend so much time working. But ask yourself, how are you uniquely gifted to love and serve your neighbor through your work? So is there a Christian way to bale hay? The answer is no. There's no Christian way to bale hay. But there is a Christian way to treat your employees. Is there a Christian way to bake bread? No, there's not a Christian way to bake bread. There's only one way to bake bread. You put it in the oven, right? Shows how much I know about baking bread, I know. But there's no uniquely Christian way to bake bread. But there is a Christian way to source your ingredients. There is a Christian way to set your price points. There's a Christian way to live and work within your community. So no, there's no specific Christian way to do a lot of these jobs, these vocations, these things that we're called to do. But God does have a way of finding his way into your work. So I ask you today, what does God say about your work? And what does your work say about God? All right, friends, regardless of what you've been called to do, whether it's paid or not paid, blue or white collar, whether you take a shower before work or after, remember, God has uniquely gifted you to do something. And do it in a way that represents your belief in God and your love for your neighbor. All right, friends, go out and be awesome to each other.